Welcome to the latest in SANAM S4's webinar series. Today we're talking about taking associations global, building membership value and service offerings. So I guess why this topic? So SANAM S4 works with a number of trade and industry bodies to support them in developing models and new models, and also help support the implementation of new routes to market overseas. And given the global nature of members and the types of topics that they engage in, there's an increasing need for associations to grow their international voice and their international footprint. So we have worked with a number of associations in delivering against these objectives over the years, and felt it would be valuable to spend some time considering that today. So with that context, I'm very pleased to be joined by leaders from the Information Technology Industry Council, or ITI, and the Chartered Institute for Logistics and Transport, or CILT, and SANAM S4, for a bit of an update on global operational trends for membership-driven organizations, and also to explore different models that exist to support the growing needs for a global footprint. So this will allow us to get a few different perspectives, so from two quite different associations headquartered in different geographies. So in terms of how the running order will work today, we will kick off with Cody Ankney, who is Manager of Global Policy at ITI, based in Washington, D.C. Once Cody's covered his session, Michael Green, who's General Manager of SANAM S4's business in India, will then pick up on some questions. And we'll then move to Keith Newton, who's International Secretary General for CILT in the UK. And I will then, myself, Edward Dixon, who's Managing Director of SANAM S4's business in the UK, will then pick up on some questions and a few points from a SANAM S4 perspective, leaving Michael to wrap us up. In terms of just a few bits of housekeeping, so you'll notice there's a window on the screen in front of you that will allow you to ask questions through the course of the session today. Please feel free to use that. The more interactive, the better. And the other thing is just to say that today's webinar is audio only and slides, so there's no video, so just in case you were looking on your panel. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is hand over to Cody to give us the ITI perspective. So over to you, Cody.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Michael and Mohit, for inviting me and organizing this session. Like Ed said, my name is Cody Ankney. I work at the Information Technology Industry Council, or ITI, and I work primarily on trade policy, and I lead and coordinate all of our work in India. So ITI is based in DC, but we operate globally. So we've thought extensively about how we go internationally and how we engage internationally and create value for our members. So when they invited me to speak here today, I was happy to do so, to share some of the considerations that we've gone through. So first, I'm first going to talk about what ITI is and what we do, because that really informs the models that we chose in different geographies around the world. So bear with me while I go through that before we get into more the meat of my presentation. So ITI is the global voice of the tech sector. We represent around 60 of the largest and most innovative technology companies. On your screen, you should be seeing the list of all of our companies that are currently members at ITI. They're headquartered all over the world, and they cover the entire spectrum of the tech industry, including internet companies like the Googles and Facebooks, hardware companies like IBM, Amazon, or Intel, and software companies like Microsoft and others. And we are a policy organization. So we represent our companies in both the U.S. and abroad to affect policy outcomes that are beneficial for our companies and that foster innovation and growth in the economies in which we engage. And we are based in D.C., but we have, because of our diverse and global membership, we represent really a truly international perspective. And that perspective is key to our branding and our value added in policy discussions because we can bring together best practices from around the world to advise governments on effective technology policies. And we do that, we're able to do that because we have a pretty broad group of policy experts on staff that can really go deep in these issues. So ITI is primarily organized into 5 different teams. Our government affairs team are the lobbyists that are up on the Hill and the U.S. Congress trying to inform legislation. Our public sector team mostly works with public procurement policy in the U.S. and both federal and local levels. Environment sustainability team works on just that. Of course, those issues are very important to the tech industry, and they work primarily in the U.S., but also do some international work, particularly in India, Europe, and China. Of course, we have an external affairs team, which does all of our comms work, and the global policy team, which is the team that I am on. And because we directly with foreign governments, we are the ones that are thinking the most about how can we effectively do so. And because of that, we manage all of our different models of representation around the world. So our team is, you can think of it in 2 different ways. We have functional expertise. Like I said, I work on trade issues. We have people that do exclusively cybersecurity and privacy policy. We have standards. We do a lot of standards, regulatory and regulatory compliance. And we also engage on different technologies like artificial intelligence, over-the-top services, Internet of Things, cloud computing, and more. But we also organize our team in terms of the regions in which we engage. So of course India is really a team-wide effort that we all engage in India together. China is of course incredibly important to the tech sector, and we have a point person that coordinates and really does all of our China work, as well as Greater Asia, so primarily Japan and Korea, but also Southeast Asia, India, and Vietnam. We have a point person that coordinates all of our work in Latin America. We do a lot of work in Europe, some in Africa, and a lot in multilateral fora such as the WTO, G7, APEC, and others. Because of the kind of broad issues that we work on, and we're really trying to cover the whole world here, we do a lot of we're a very highly collaborative team. And a lot of people do more than one thing. Like I said, I work on both trade and India, and our Latin America person leads our work for OTT technologies and those sorts of things. So we all work together pretty collaboratively, and that informs the models that we've chosen for around the world. So what you see in front of you right now is a basic overview of the models that we do currently have. And of course, because of resources, we would love to have on the ground representation in every market in which we engage, but we have to choose the ones that create the most value for our members. And those generally tend to be areas, regions, or countries that have a lot of restrictive policies or trending restrictive for our industry, but also ones that are just, of course, important markets for our companies. So just as a high-level overview, in India we currently employ a team of consultants. There's about 5 consultants on the ground there that between them divvy up a lot of the policy priority issues that we work on, and will engage directly with their corresponding ITI staff member here in DC. In Brazil, we have a single consultant that we retain that is single point of contact in Brazil, and really focuses just on Brazil and not the rest of Latin America. In China, we have a really interesting model of association of associations. So there's a trade association in China that was founded by ITI and other tech trade associations in the U.S. to cohesively represent the U.S. tech industry in China, and that's important, and I'll get to that in in a minute here. And then in the EU, this is new for us. We just hired a direct employee to sit in Brussels to represent us for the EU. So partially what's driven these models is how our team already engages in each market and vice versa, where our team has evolved over time to match the models that we've chosen because it's, as you can imagine, it's really important to be able to seamlessly integrate between the home office and the representation on the ground. So for example, I coordinate all of our work in India, but I don't necessarily weigh in on every issue. So when we're dealing with cybersecurity issues, which is not my area of expertise, the representative on the ground in India will directly communicate with our cybersecurity person, but I'm always part of that conversation, particularly so we can coordinate our messaging and make sure that we're consistent across all of our policy areas. Alternatively, in China, we have an entire association at our disposal on the ground there, and so we really only have one single point of contact at ITI to integrate with our association on the ground in China, and all of our China work goes through that person. And that's, those two models are kind of the two extremes I think that we deal with here, but that's it's informed by the model that we've chosen and also the organization that we have at ITI. So our model in India, or a consultant team, has a lot of benefits. Particularly, you get more people and more expertise to draw from, which I think is pretty obvious. But what that means is that there can be greater brand building. So we have more people on the ground, more people in conversations with the government and with other stakeholders in India that are representing us. So this is part of the reason we chose this model when we first entered into the Indian market, because we wanted to be able to build brand recognition of ITI and build a reputation of being a trusted partner on policy work in India. And it has been effective in doing just that. Of course, there are a lot of challenges because of the model, because it's more disaggregated. There's the issue that I mentioned earlier about coordination and prioritization of our issues and of our messaging across our issue areas. So that's where I come in, and that's why I'm in the role that I'm in, and I lead a lot of our work that we do there, but a lot of it I'm just more of a clearinghouse than an actual involved in the policy work itself. In addition, whenever you get a team of consultants, everyone isn't necessarily the same skill level. So it could be that one of the people that has one of our policy priorities on that team is maybe a more junior consultant, and so there might be a skill gap in the consistency across the team. And of course, that can be mitigated through communication and through making sure that they're working together to make sure that those issues are being covered. And the issue that you have with any consultant is that they have other clients as well. So you don't get all of their attention all the time, and when we have a fire burning, they're responsive, but whenever somebody else has a fire burning, they may not be as responsive to us. So that's always a consideration. In Brazil, as I mentioned, we have a single consultant, the benefit of which is that you get to choose who that consultant is, where with a team maybe less so. But with that one person, you can choose who that is, and you can make sure that they're highly skilled, they have the right contacts, and just having a single point of contact when dealing with any issue in that country is quite a bit easier to coordinate across the board. And of course, there's less turnover when it's a single person, single senior person that's in that position. And this is true of any of these models, but the ability to leverage personal contacts for that single person is really important, especially in the policy space. But again, when you have a single consultant, you can choose the right person with the right network that can get you the right contacts. The challenges are similar to the other consultant, is that they have other clients as well, so same issue there. And since it is a single person, they might not have the same amount of bandwidth that a whole team will have. The China model, our association of associations, there's a lot of benefits that come with that, including a large pool of resources and broad experience and bandwidth because of those resources. And that's something that's been really important in China, because there's a lot going on there in the technology policy space. And really importantly for China is we have this model allows us to have a unified voice for U.S. industry. So we have found that when dealing in policy discussions in China, if there are different associations that have different messages, the Chinese government is often very good at exploiting those differences to kind of get to their own ends. So the unification of the voice is very important for our effectiveness in China. Of course, the challenge that comes with that is coordination and prioritization between the parent associations. So some of these associations could be considered our competitors for policy influence. Even though we have a lot of overlapping members between them, different associations have different priorities. So that's really something that we have to focus on to make sure that our issues are getting the right amount of attention that they should be. And of course, there's a branding issue there, is that the association on the ground represents all of us, so they aren't necessarily carrying around the ITI flag. So we do still have to travel to China quite a bit in order to do that. So this last model, a direct representation in the EU, is new for us, so we don't have a lot of experience in it yet. But what we can say is the benefits are straightforward, right? I mean, you have a direct employee; they're full time and they're dedicated to you, which takes away from the consultant issue, and you have complete control over who's working there and who is representing you. In addition, I think this is maybe a subtle point, but it's important, is that they're a direct representation of the organization. Whereas when you have a consultant or the China model that we have, there are extensions of the organization. So when our consultants are going into meetings, we want them to say, I represent this person who will come and visit at a later time to have continuing discussions. When we have someone on the ground that has an ITI card, they say, I represent the interests of this organization and our members. So it's a little more direct, which in some cases, and I think in the EU, is quite a bit more effective. Challenges, of course, the same issue of bandwidth when you only have a single person, and it's just more expensive compared to retaining a consultant. Now, there's of course a cost-benefit analysis there. At what point does paying more for a single person but having their full-time attention rather than a consultant, there's a tipping point where that starts to make sense, and we reached that in the EU just recently. So I think that's all I had for now, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But I think that gives a pretty good overview of how we engage around the world. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. This is Michael Green. Cody, thank you very much for providing that overview of ITI and, I guess the thought process behind how ITI has expanded from Washington, D.C. So, and just, I guess, a quick question in terms of, and I think you might have hit on it in terms of a few of the different factors, but what are the major factors in deciding to put boots on the ground? And I guess that's a two-part question. One, what are the major factors in deciding to, make any sort of investment into a foreign market? And then the second part of that question is, I think, getting to the direct representation model that you've taken in the EU. So what factors kind of pushed you over the brink to put you towards, finding your direct representative in the market?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the first factor is, what do our members care about? Of course, I mean, we are a membership-driven organization, so they kind of guide us to which markets we need to be focused in, and it's usually pretty straightforward. I mean, when it comes to where they're doing business and where the more onerous laws and measures or regulations are coming out. But once we know which markets we need to be engaged in, we travel a lot for the global policy team. So we have to start thinking about at some point, what amount of travel takes away from our ability to be effective in other markets. So a good example here is Latin America, actually. So we have, as I mentioned, our consultant works in Brazil exclusively, but that's only part of what our Latin America person works on. She engages in Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Argentina. and more. So if she has to travel to Brazil every 2 or 3 months, how does that detract from her ability to be effective in those other markets? So I think that was a big reason why we chose to get boots on the ground in Brazil. And then of course there's a cost associated with that when we're paying for plane tickets to a particular market every couple months. Maybe it would be cheaper, or maybe there's a tipping point there in the benefit of having someone on the ground there, just to pay for that rather than all of the travel costs. But I think even more importantly, other than resources, is thinking about the effectiveness of our messaging, and having a more deep cultural understanding and insight into government processes, and not having to develop personal networks and contacts over time. When you hire somebody, when you get somebody on the ground in a country, you really have a lot more insight into how it works, and when we write a response to a draft measure that is put out for comment, and we're writing a response to that, having someone that has a more nuanced cultural understanding can help us word that correctly to be more effective. Or they can say, okay, you can submit it to this person, but we also need to submit it to this other person because they're the ones that are really influencing a lot of the decisions. So that's a really, for these high priority markets, especially ones that tend to be kind of an enigma like India, it can be really challenging if you don't understand those nuances. And that really is what drives us to get boots on the ground. In the EU, to answer your second question, for direct representation, there's so much going on in the European Union for the tech industry, that there was a point where we realized we were spending a lot of our resources here in the home office to travel over there to engage. And we have really good relationships with people in the European Commission and those sorts of things, but we didn't have someone that is eyes and ears on the ground all the time. We didn't have someone that has a broader network than we could develop just by traveling over there every couple months. And so that's what really drove us to hire a direct person there. And just the amount of things that are happening in the policy space in the EU really, I think, necessitated having a full-time person that was a direct representation of our organization.
Okay, and in terms of, so did you go straight from fly in, fly out to, I guess, establishing it's your employee, so you established your own entity in Europe?
Right, yeah, we went straight to it. Okay.
And again, I think you might have hit on this, but in terms of local voices, and I think this is very important in terms of running advocacy campaigns. And just for everyone's background, I joined SunMS4 last year in their Washington, D.C. office, and I'm now based out of here in India, but previously was with the U.S.-India Business Council, which is a trade association based out of Washington, D.C. It also has offices in Delhi. So, Cody, I understand how important local voices are. So maybe could you, I guess, just expound upon how each of these different models play into your ability to manage the messaging and identify the local voices that you're looking to find in these markets to carry the message forward?
Yeah, so I think that, this is absolutely essential, critical, I think, in all these markets that we work in, and I think no more so than India. I was at an event on Monday talking about the U.S.-India economic relationship, and one of the presenters, we were talking about protectionism, and one of the presenters said, well, one of the reasons why India can be really hard for foreign companies to do business in is because their first experience with a foreign company was the East India Trading Company, and that was not a very positive experience for them. And so that's one of those cultural things that maybe you don't realize until you have people who are on the ground and understand those nuances in the market. in which you operate. And because of this, we do a lot of work in understanding the political and social climate in which we work in. But really nothing is more effective than having somebody there who is from there and that can give insight into how they can be most effective. So I think that when you're talking about consultants as opposed to more of these kind of direct models, is that when you have a consultant, they're really 1 degree separated from the organization that they're representing, and that they, when they give their card to somebody, it doesn't have ITI's name on it; it has another name on it. Whereas, when you have direct representation, that's somebody that's from there saying, I represent them, I work for them, they're employing me. It's not just I work, that I represent them. So I think that model, because it's more direct and it is a local person, can be more effective. Again, and the reason that we don't, in a lot of ways, I think this is probably the better model if it weren't for the amount of resources that could cost as compared to a consultant team. But because of this issue of local voices, I mean, we work a lot with local companies and associations for that reason, because the kind of global trend that you see not only in developing countries but more so in developed countries, I think is pretty clear, is this idea of protectionism, protecting our local companies against foreign companies, and this kind of political climate makes it really difficult for us to do business overseas, which is, may or may not be representative of how the international economy really works, and that's really part of our messaging and how we think about and talk about these things a lot. But nothing is more effective to counter that narrative than to have somebody from that country saying, no, these foreign companies actually help our local companies in a lot of ways. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Cody. I think now I'll turn it over to Keith to provide his presentation and a bit of a different perspective. So we're moving from Washington, D.C. over to London in the U.K. So Keith, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's Keith Newton here, speaking to you from, so greetings to everybody on the call from a rather cold and wet summer's day in the UK. So yes, as Michael was saying, they're a different organisation in terms of its focus. I've personally been a member of the Institute, or the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, for over 30 years. And I've been in my current role for the last 5 years. That particular role, my responsibility is the global coordination of the Institute across the countries where we've got members. If I move you to the second slide, who we are. We are different from ITI in the sense that we're essentially an individual membership body for professionals who are involved in what is quite a wide scope of transport, logistics and supply chain. So there's physical transport in there. You can see some of the sectors. There's ports, there's aviation, and then we move more into logistics and transport planning and some of the supply chain disciplines. So quite a broad church where we're representing people who work within those environments. We do have corporate membership, and as I speak further, the corporate membership is growing, but it has always been secondary to individual membership of the body. In terms of our geographical representation, again, quite different from ITI. So we've got a strength in Africa, Asia, and parts of Europe. But very little in the Americas. So quite a different geographical footprint. there are 33,000 plus members. It's just currently edging over 34,000 now. And half of those members are in the UK. So the UK historically is our strength and the historic base of our organisation. But having said that, we've got great strength in a number of countries where the professional body is recognised as being the leading representative body in many areas, and that scope will take us typically across policy in terms of helping and influencing government policy on transport and logistics, education and training, continuous professional development for our members, and then a wide range of membership services for our individual members and corporate members globally. So that could be anything from running events to mentoring services to networking and professional gatherings. So professional membership services are very critical, and I'll talk a little bit further about that as it applies to our organisation. Let me talk a little bit more about our global membership model on slide 4. So as I say, we're an individual membership organisation. We were founded in 1919. That gives a long history, which is positive and negative. Our model is a devolved model, so centrally managed through the fact that we are a UK charity and we have a royal charter means that we have defined standards of membership and education that are managed centrally. That means wherever you are a member to a set of standards, and that membership varies across experience and knowledge. And those standards are then governed by the central body and the central trustees. By the nature of being a UK charity, those trustees are based in the UK. But being a devolved model, what we do is we have, by virtue of a delegation agreement with all the 34 countries that I spoke about, that devolves the responsibility for that, for meeting those standards to each of those countries, and it does that typically to a group of members. So we encourage a group of professional members to take up that responsibility within the country and then run the programs for that country on a devolved basis. The countries therefore drive the strategy and the growth, and historically the reasons for setting up that country can vary hugely. For example, in India, and I'll talk a little bit more about India. India's started as a separate institute in the 1950s, was based around the Indian Railways, where a group of professionals came together, and they have since that point in time led the provision of services and limited education in India. What we've been seeking to do is, where those partnerships exist, is to grow and develop, but importantly, when I joined 5 years ago, we've been focusing very much on our central governance and capability to then drive globally growth. And again, I'll talk a little bit further on that in the context of India as we move through the slides. If we look at that membership model, then from a Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport standpoint, the membership model brings us challenges and opportunities. Individual membership undoubtedly going into the future is under stress. We have growth, but low growth. and the value of membership is much more critical than it was certainly 30 years ago, and even 5 years ago, much more critical that members see value from joining the organisation and being part of the organisation. In how we tackle some of that, that's again back to how we focus on this internationally. Training and education are very critical part of our forward offer to our members. Using the strength that we have geographically in Asia and Africa, so India and China are our selected growth points, and we put a lot of focus on the brand and how we portray ourselves globally as a family. As an individual membership organisation, it's around people, and then how we use some of the global media tools, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So the following slide, slide 6, and moving into slide 7, talks about how we're doing that in terms of how we position ourselves globally, and then seeking through the countries to then replicate that approach within the different markets. So there's a strong understanding of who we are and what we're about. And that in the last 2 slides in my presentation, purely pictorial here, but with quite a focus on 2 groups, young professionals, in terms of encouraging younger people in the profession to not only become members, but to aggregate together globally. And women in logistics and transport, which is a fascinating subset. We could spend a long time talking about that, but we now have women in logistics and transport groups within 20 of our institutes, 19 or 20. And we've also got groupings in countries where we haven't got an institute. And that growth has been quite vibrant and quite dramatic over the last 5 years, to the sense that our international convention, of which I've just come from one, has a 50-50 split men and women, which is untypical for our profession. So that was my overview. I think I'll pass on to Ed just to summarise that and ask any questions or lead any questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Keith. So I've got a couple of questions. I suppose one around the operating model, and then one just perhaps a sort of crystal ball moment in terms of looking forwards. So on the operating model, I mean, so you touched on a variety of different models that you deploy, and it's legacy is sort of designed from scratch. But when you look to kind of evolve models that you operate around the world, what would cause them to kind of vary country to country?
It largely, Ed, historic. So a lot of the variation has been historic. In more recent years, we've formed more partnerships with education, so that have an education base, and that our belief is our strongest base, where we can form a partnership with an education provider and with professional members and with corporates. Those are the 3 legs of the stool, really. And we're seeking to develop more of a strategic approach around that. So Kazakhstan's been a good example of that, where we only 18 million people in the country, but we've got a partnership with the leading logistics provider there, covers the railway business and the and aviation and quite a lot of the supply chain. Has an strong education base, and one of the criteria in setting that up has been to then link across with other professional members from other bodies. So we're attempting now to have a much more strategic approach, and that we've worked with Sanam in India in a first stage of that to actually look and understand the market in much more of a controlled way rather than what has traditionally been an ad hoc basis on working with people who've approached us.
Good. Okay, some good insights there. And then I suppose that the crystal ball moment. So you mentioned that for CILT, obviously individual membership is still your accounts for the vast majority of your membership. But if you kind of look forwards in the international context, do you see that sort of blend of individual versus corporate changing?
We do. We do think it. So the individual membership is the essence of who we are, really, but it does pose most of our future challenges, and that's really loyalty has and will become more eroded. Will people always be members of an organisation for 30 years like I have? That's unlikely, I think, is our view. We still believe we should put focus on that. That's really why we're looking at sort of doing it globally more. So we have global standards, but we don't have global administration and membership. So that's a potential area to look in more detail. Very important to have value. Some of that value can be, rather than each individual country creating its own value, there's also a very important overlay of creating global value. And then I think in terms of the corporate links, again, we've traditionally approached corporate membership from a country-by-country basis, and with very little recognition of how corporates span countries. We don't have any easy answers here, but our view is that we should link this more into education. We should use India and China in a corporate sense to prove a model, and work at how we can actually also execute at a global level with corporates.
Good. Okay, that's interesting. So I'm just going to take the opportunity. You mentioned in the answer to your previous question that you'd done a bit of work with Animus Support. So I'll just take the opportunity just to outline for those that aren't aware the sort of work that we do to support organisations such as yourselves. So the piece you touched on was research, which is a kind of core area for us in terms of really working out how to go to market in terms of what the best models are. So that in this instance could be out actually talking to industry, could be out talking to individuals in terms of what their actual needs are, to try and establish the scale of the market and also how to access it. We've also got and provide a substantial amount of support on the implementation side of things. So that's really around understanding regulatory footprint, for example, on education and CPD and that kind of thing, but also on actual setting up legal entities, running legal entities, and kind of more on the kind of consultant model that Cody referenced as well. Animus Support has a solution that we call Launchpad that allows us to support across 20 odd countries now the ability to be able to provide access to in-market expertise. And I suppose the final bit is really just advising on business development strategies, and obviously that term can vary substantially from one organisation to the next. But there's just a brief kind of kind of potted overview in terms of the type of support that we provide. So with that, I'm probably just going to hand over to Michael just to scoop up the questions that we've had come through and wrap up. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate the overview there. I think I just kind of expound upon one of the points that Cody had made earlier in terms of the degree of separation and the nuance with that, with the Launchpad model from SONIMS 4, and that essentially is what Launchpad creates. So we'll go out into the market and find somebody, whether it's a junior resource, depending on what you're looking for, a senior resource, to exclusively represent the interest of our client. So it's not a matter of us necessarily assembling a team and, as Cody mentioned, kind of putting out fires here and there, but we really work with the client to ensure that the relationship develops, the right person is found to really be out in the market on a day-to-day basis, moving the objectives forward. So I think, Ed, I just kind of wanted to add to that. In terms of any questions, I have one I'd just like to throw out, maybe first to you, Cody, and then Keith. In terms of these models that you have discussed, how do you see them developing over the next 5 to 10 years with the amount of activity, Cody, from a policy advocacy standpoint, as that activity increases? Do you see new markets on the horizon? Do you see ITI kind of looking at different models as kind of an evolution from where you're at currently?
Yeah, I would say, it's always hard to to look into the future, but I think that the way that the technology policy world is moving is that a lot of our issues are kind of coming to the fore. I think you just turn on the news and you'll see something about encryption or data or cybersecurity hacks or whatever. And because of that, especially in developing markets which may not have had to deal with a lot of these issues in the past, are becoming very active as far as creating regulations and passing laws and those sorts of things. So I only see our involvement increasing. I think that this recent person that we hired in the EU is indicative of that. Depending what's happening in the other markets in which we have consultants, we might have to elevate that to get more of a full-time person on the ground because of what's happening in those areas. So I think that's where it's moving, and there's a lot to think about there. But of course, as I mentioned, resources is a big one of those. As far as creating new offices or new representations around the world, it's hard to say, and it really just matters the economic wins of the world, I think, over the next 10 or 20 years that would determine that.
Cool, thank you. Keith, same question over to you. How do you see the model evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And I think you've touched on pieces of that, but if you could just expound for the audience.
Yes, yeah. So I think we're pretty clear on who we are and what we want to do in terms of being a representative professional body that's very critically in the growing logistics, transport, supply chain world. Sets professional standards and educates and trains. Huge opportunities. So we see that. We're gradually creating more capability, both in terms of finance and in terms of central capability. It's all about strategy now for us in terms of how we do that. We're focused very much on India, China, the Belt and Road particularly is giving us a very obvious target area to focus in, and we're having quite some success in China at an early stage in terms of how we engage as an institute with that. I think in India we've got to do more work around how and the strategy, and that will be our focus area, and certainly over the next couple of years. And very much how do we use our education products successfully, because that starts to give us a sort of virtuous circle of income and then investment.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think we're coming up on the hour, so I'd like to thank Ed for leading us through today's discussion, and Cody and Keith for your presentations. Just for those who are on the line today, for everybody who's registered, we'll be circulating these presentations to you along with the audio recording. So with that, if you have any further questions about different models and developing, taking your association global, we're happy to answer any questions. We're also happy to put you in touch with Cody and Keith to bounce any ideas off of them, given their experience across a range of different markets. So with that, have a good day to those of you in the U.S. Good afternoon for those who are in Europe, and from here in India, a good evening, and if anybody joined us here from India. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll talk soon.